Hello everyone, it's Scott, and today it's time for today's look at Phyrexia. All will be one spoilers. So we've got a bunch of cards to talk about today, some interesting ones that I'm very excited about to talk about. Before we get started, thanks to Caffeinated Gamers for sponsoring this video, and remember to like and subscribe so you can get further content like this throughout Phyrexia. All will be one spoiler season. So let's get started. Alright, so first we have Complete Devotion. For a colorless and a white mana, you get an instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 until the end of turn. If it has Toxic, draw a card. So this is, I think, something that was meant to go in the Toxic deck, certainly in Limited. But if we do end up with that green, white, black Toxic deck or some combination thereof, this is a good card in that. It's a nice little spell, but it's also really card draw for you. Which I think that deck's going to want to have some of to keep pushing its game. Next we have Planar Disruption. For a colorless and a white mana, you get an enchantment that's an aura, and it's enchant artifact, creature, or planeswalker. An enchanted permanent cannot attack or block, and its activated abilities cannot be activated. So this is probably the best version of this kind of card that we've seen. We've seen versions of this that, you can put it on a permanent that's a creature and it cannot attack or block. Okay, pacify, being the obvious choice there for cards. But what this does is it hits artifacts and it also hits planeswalkers. And I can't say enough about the fact that being able to shut down a planeswalker and not have to kill it, that's a pretty powerful ability. So I can see this being played not only in Limited, but certainly I think it has a chance to see some serious play in Standard, certainly as a sideboard card, but possibly as a main deck card. Because we've got so many planeswalkers right now floating around Standard, and being able to put this on it and stop it from doing anything would be a really powerful ability. So I think we're going to see this one somewhere in Standard, depending on how much the planeswalkers, not only from this set, see play, but what we've talked about before in terms of planeswalkers. Next, we have some blue cards for today. First, we have Mind Splice Apparatus. For 3 and a blue mana, we get an artifact that has flash, and at the beginning of your upkeep, put an oil counter on Mind Slice Apparatus. Instants and sorcery spells you cast 1 less to cast for each oil counter on Mind Slice Apparatus. So first thing, and yesterday we got the Filigree Silex. So this card to me looks like one that goes really well with that, because we want a way to get to those 10 oil counters with Filigree Silex, so we can do 10 points. So I can see these two cards working kind of well together to get up to that 10 count, so you can do 10 damage to your opponent in a game. I also think that the ability to reduce the cost of instants and sorceries here is a powerful ability. So we might see it in an Is It Tempo deck or something of that ilk, which can reduce the cost of things and make some of the higher cost sorcery spells that we see in Standard, and possibly we've got some instants obviously that we're talking about as well from the set, that I think the ability to reduce that cost is certainly something that people are going to want. So I think this is potentially playable, and the fact that you can flash it in, I think, is a really powerful ability, because you can flash this in on your opponent's end step, and then you can start getting the advantage from it immediately on your next turn, and your opponent wouldn't be able to deal with it then. So I like this. I think it's going to have some playability in Standard, particularly in that oil, if we have an oil counter deck that develops. Next we have Quicksilver Fisher. 3 and 2 blue mana, you get a Phyrexian Drake. That's a 4/3. It has flying, and when Quicksilver Fisher enters the battlefield, you draw a card and then you discard a card. This is a limited card. You're going to see it played limited, but probably not anything outside of that. Next we have Transplant Theorist. For 3 and a blue mana, you get a Phyrexian Artificer, who's an artifact creature and is a 2/4. And when Transplant Theorist or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So this is going to be a card that has an an important filtering ability, because you can obviously, if you play this in an artifact deck, and there are a lot of artifacts in this set, and then obviously that we saw in not only the Brothers Wars but Dominaria United, so there's a lot of artifacts that are see play in Standard. So I think this, if you do see this played a bunch, I think it's going to be in an artifact deck where you can get that filtering ability. And what I think really makes it very playable is its 2-mana ability, where you can put a target card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. So if you're just casting stuff and you're filtering through, you cast something that ends up in the graveyard, or you throw a card into the graveyard, you want to get it back at some point. If you've got filtering ability in your deck, you might be able to filter your way to the bottom and get that card. Now, the likelihood of that is limited in Standard, but with as much card filtering as we have right now in Standard, it's certainly a possibility that you could get something back from the graveyard this way. And that could be creatures or anything. So I think this is playable in an artifact deck. Next we have Blightbelly Rat. For a colorless and a black mana, you get a Phyrexian Rat with Toxic 1. And then when Blightbelly Rat dies, you get to proliferate. If there's some kind of rat deck that forms, certainly would be included, and it does have Toxic, so that helps a little bit, but more likely going to see only play in Limited. Alright, next we have Bone Picker Scourge. For 2 and a black mana, you get a Phyrexian Imp, that's a 2/2. It has flying, and it also has the corrupt ability on it. And as long as an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, Bone Picker Scourge has Death Touch and Lifelink. So I think, in that poison deck, because it has flying, maybe it has a limited playability in Standard if you want to make sure that, because you want to be able to get the advantage of this. But again, you've got to have things that have Toxic to get those 3 counters on there, to get the Death Touch and the Lifelink. So I think this has some limited playability in Standard, but not any more than that. Certainly playable in Limited. Next we have Necrogen Communion. For 1 and a black mana, you get an enchantment, that's an aura. Enchant creature you control. Enchanted creature has Toxic 2. And when enchanted creature dies, return that card to the battlefield under your control. We're already seeing enchantments or instants that have this ability of returning a creature to the battlefield when it dies. So I can see this as an easy card to include in any kind of black deck that you want to make sure you're getting your cards back. Can you imagine this on a Sheoldred? Sheoldred, you attack with Sheoldred, or that your opponent kills Sheoldred, you've already got this on it, and now it comes right back to the battlefield. So nice little protection piece for Sheoldred or any other big card that you have. So I think there's some playability for it in Standard. Certainly a limited playable card. Next we have Varan, Executor Than. For 1 and a black mana, you get a legendary creature. That's a Phyrexian Vampire, and it's a 2/2. And whenever 1 or more other creatures you control die, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. This ability only triggers once each turn. Now, I think the perfect place for this card is in the Oni Cult Anvil deck. We've seen that deck have a lot of success in Standard at times, but it's just really been outdistanced by the power level of a lot of the other cards in Standard right now. But this card, I think, may bring that up to a tier 2 situation where it's certainly playable in Standard without much difficulty, because when you use Oni Cult Anvil, a lot of times you're sacrificing, after the first time, you're probably sacrificing the blood token to create the 1/1 artifact construct, and then after that you're sacrificing those constructs. Well, anytime you do that, not only if you're using Oni Cult Anvil's ability to do this, you gain a life, and your opponent loses a life. But now, if you have Varan on the field, now you gain 3 life, your opponent loses 3 life, and that's something that you can actually trigger not only on your turn, but your opponent's turn. So I can see, in the right situation, you have 2 Oni Cult Anvils on the field. You sacrifice one of your creature tokens on your turn to do 3 damage and gain 3 life by tapping one of the anvils. On your opponent's turn, you block with 1, When you go to combat damage, you tap the other anvil, you sacrifice it. Again, because of the abilities, it's going to do 3 damage to your opponent, and you gain 3 life. And that's a 12 life swing just on one full turn, meaning your turn and your opponent's turn. So other people might not be seeing this as powerful enough in there, but I think this is an ability that really, in that sacrifice deck, I think has a really good shot to be a very good card in it. Next we have Urabrask Anointer. For 3 and a red mana, you get an artifact creature that's a Phyrexian wizard. That's a 4/2. And when Urabrask Anointer enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to target creature, where X is a number of permanents you control with an oil counter on them. Again, I don't see this as incredibly playable in Standard, but we've got enough cards that generate oil counters that it might be, as kind of a top end of an oil counter deck, as a way to do some direct damage to kind of finish off the game. We've already talked about the Filigree Silex as a card that potentially, if you get 10 of those counters on it, can do 10 damage when you sacrifice it. So I think there's some ability here to use this as well if you've got those counters spread across a lot of creatures. Otherwise, it's probably not very playable in Standard outside of that deck. So kind of limited niche playability here for Standard. Next we have some green cards. So the first one is Tyvar's Stand. For X and a green mana, you get an instant, and target creature you control gets +X/+X and gains hexproof and indestructible until the end of the turn. So this is a very good card. I expect that we'll see this replace in green decks Tamiyo Safekeeping, because not only do you get the hexproof and indestructible for a green mana, but later in the game, you have the ability to play this at instant speed on a green creature, probably that has trample, because we've got a number of those right now, or another creature that has trample. And not only do you protect your creature, but then you get some extra damage in as well that might be enough to finish off an opponent or get them to a place where it's pretty certain that eventually you're going to win the game. So I think the surprise factor in this certainly says that it should go into green decks in replacing Tamiyo Safekeeping, because it's simply more flexible than Tamiyo Safekeeping is. The downside of this, though, is it can only target a creature, while Tamiyo Safekeeping can target any permanent, so that is a drawback of the card. But most of the time you're using Tamiyo Safekeeping to protect a creature, so I think in the long run this is probably the better card for Standard. Next we have Viral Spawning. For 2 and a green mana, you get a sorcery that creates a 3/3 green Phyrexian Beast creature token with Toxic 1. Then it has Corrupted, and as long as an opponent has 3 or more poison counters on it, and Viral Spawning is in your graveyard, it has Flashback of 2 and a green mana. So I think this might be again playable in that Toxic deck as a way to kind of get a 2-for-1. You cast it maybe on turn 3, and then you get to that point where you get to the 3 poison counters on your opponent, and then you can flash it back from your graveyard and create another creature in the late to mid to late game, where you have a lot fewer cards in your hand. So anytime we have a card like this, I think it's certainly playable potentially in Standard, and particularly in that Toxic deck. Next we have Serum Core Chimera. For 2 and a blue and a red, you get a Phyrexian Chimera. That's a 2/4. And it has flying, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on Serum Core Chimera. So I think this is a card that, again, if you're looking for that oil theme, this is a good card in that, because we've got a number of cards already in the set that have this ability of whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on it. So in a deck that's following that philosophy, where maybe it's 12 to 14 creatures, you've got the Filigree Silex, and maybe some other things like the earlier card Urabrask Anointer in the deck. to have some payoffs for those oil counters. And in Serum Core Chimera's advantage here, though, is also that you can use your counters for some purpose. So you can remove 3 of those oil counters and draw a card, and then you may discard a card. When you do, Serum Core Chimera deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker and only activate as a sorcery. So the nice thing about this is it can basically, for those 3 counters, you can do basically a lightning bolt to a creature or a planeswalker, which I think is a pretty good ability. So if we do see an oil counter deck develop, this is the kind of card I'd want to see in that, because it has that extra ability that it does something beyond just being a 2/4 creature that gets counters on it. And I think that's a pretty good ability to draw cards, and then potentially if you discard something, then you're going to do more damage. And since it's just a card, you can discard extra lands to this to get that value out of it. And again, a lot of times decks are looking for the ability to do just a little bit more damage to a creature or a planeswalker, and this is the kind of card that utility kind of card that does that for you. Next, we have Vivisection Evangelist. For 3 white and a black mana, you get a Phyrexian Cleric who's a 4/4. It has Vigilance and its corrupted ability, so this is looking probably like a card that wants to be in that poison counter deck. When Vivisection Evangelist enters the battlefield, if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters on it, destroy a target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. So this would be kind of the top end of that kind of of that poison counter deck, and I think this is maybe a 1 or 2 of in the deck. Just because the mana cost is so high, and for most of the cards in that deck, the mana cost is relatively low, and I think that's going to keep that deck moving quickly to try to kill your opponent with those 10 poison counters. Next, we have Kethic, Crucible Goliath. For 2, a black and a green mana, or black and a red mana, You get a legendary creature that's a Phyrexian beast, and at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-legendary creature card with lesser mana value, put it on the battlefield, then put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And it's also a 4/4. So the nice thing about this is we're talking about mana cost. So it has to have lesser mana cost. So we're talking about, probably you're sacrificing a 3 or 4 mana creature and then getting a 1 or a 2 mana creature in return. And because the fact that it has to be non-legendary, if you put just a smattering of non-legendary creatures in a legendary deck with this, then you're guaranteed to hit those particular cards. Now, how playable is this in Standard? I mean, it's an interesting ability. It's a 4/4, so it's got some nice touches to it, but in all likelihood, just because of the cards we already have at the 4-drop spot, I don't think it's going to be played in a lot of decks. But it has a fun ability, so this is maybe one of those, let's do something that's a little bit outside the curve that other people aren't doing. So that's where I see it, if it sees any play at all in Standard. All right, next we got the Skull Bomb cycle. Okay, and we got 5 today. Here are 4 of them. Next slide, we've got the other one. But we got Surgical Skull Bomb, Basilica Skull Bomb, Dross Skull Bomb, Furnace Skull Bomb, and we'll talk about these first, and then we'll talk about the other one. So each of them has a very similar ability. Sacrifice the Surgical Skull Bomb, or Basilica Skull Bomb, or the Dross Skull Bomb, or the Furnace Skull Bomb, and you get to draw a card. And then there's 5 of these, so they have each an ability based on their color. So for Surgical Skull Bomb, it's you pay 2 and a blue mana, you sacrifice it, and it returns target creature to its owner's hand. Draw a card, activate only as a sorcery. Okay, Basilica Skull Bomb, for 2 and a white, you sacrifice it, and target creature gets 2/2 until the end of gets 2/2 and gains flying until the end of turn. And again, you get to draw the card. And again, all these are activated as sorceries. Draw Skull Bomb is 2 and a black. Sacrifice, draw Skull Bomb, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, draw a card, activate only as a sorcery. And then the Furnace Skull Bomb. Furnace Skull Bomb, when you sacrifice it for 1 and a red, put 2 oil counters on target artifact or creature you control, and then draw that card. So this is the only one that's kind of outside the normal scope of what we see, because Surgical Skull Bomb, putting something back in an opponent's hand, okay, we see, you know, the unsummon type ability on a card in every standard season. So that's kind of a normal one. And again, you get the advantage of drawing a card with all of these. The Basilica, giving something +2/+2, gaining flying. Okay, we've seen cards like that are in instance. So that's kind of a normal thing. Draw Skull Bomb, getting a card back from your graveyard to your hand. That's a creature, very much a black ability. And then again, the one different one here is Furnace Skull Bomb, where this looks to me like this is the only one that kind of is slotted to do something different than we normally see. And this one to me looks like it's wanting to be in a deck that is dedicated to putting oil counters on stuff. So if we do see a deck that develops around the oil counters and it's looking to use the Filigree Silex as a way to do 10 damage to your opponent because you've got 10 oil counters that you can sacrifice, then I think this is the kind of card you would want to see in that deck, because it's putting 2 immediately on things. And because of the low cost, you're only costing it only costs us 1 mana to cast it, and then the other activated ability cost. I think that card is certainly good enough. Now the other one we have is the green one, which is Maze Skull Bomb. Again, it costs 1 mana. It has the same sack it, pay 1, draw a card, and then its larger ability is 2 mana and a green. You sacrifice Maze Skull Bomb, target creature you control gets +3/+3 and gains trample until the end of the turn, and you draw that. And again, you activate it only as a sorcery, which is in my mind, a real drawback to this card. If you could activate this at instant speed, like you can with most artifacts, then you could attack with your creatures, figure out which is the right creature to put this on, and then activate it. So I think that's a real limitation of this. So I'm not sure how much any of them see play outside of limited, with the exception of the Furnace Skull Bomb, again, because I think that might slot in nicely into an oil counter deck. Next we have Ichor Plate Golem, which is an artifact creature that's a Phyrexian Golem. That's a 2/3 for 3 mana. And whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it has 1 or more oil counters on it, put an oil counter on it. So basically, oil counters, if the creature comes into play with an oil counter on it, this is going to give it a second one. And creatures you control with oil counters on them get +1/+1. So this is kind of a lord for creatures that have oil counters on them. And again, we just saw the Furnace Skull Bomb, so you've got a way to put them on something that isn't naturally something that has oil counters on it. So there's some flexibility there. So again, maybe possibly playable in an oil counter deck if it sees play in standard. Certainly it's something that I think people will try to build around. In limited, I think it's a very good build around, because I think we've got enough stuff with oil counters on them that this kind of card would be very helpful. Next we have Argentum Masticore for 5 mana. You get a 5/5 artifact creature that's a Phyrexian Masticore. It has first strike and protection from multicolored. So this is an interesting card in the fact that it has that protection from multicolored. We've got a lot of multicolored cards in standard because Streets of New Capenna gave us a large amount of them. Now, the reality is most of them aren't seeing play, but with sets that are coming up, we may see more, and this may be a more relevant ability. But for 5 mana, a 5/5 that has first strike and protection, that's a pretty good card on its surface. And then when you add on its ability, I think it's a very playable card in Standard, and it can probably be played in almost any kind of deck because it doesn't have any color restrictions. So at the beginning of your upkeep, you sacrifice Argenta Massacre unless you discard a card. When you discard a card this way, destroy a target non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value less than or equal to the mana value of the discarded card. So Argenta Massacre, basically, it has the ability every single turn for you to sacrifice a card in your hand and kill something that your opponent has, which I think is an incredibly powerful ability because we don't see stuff like this often. So if you've got a deck where you've got the ability to draw extra cards, you're putting extra cards in your hand constantly, and you've got this where you can filter those things out, particularly with the blitz cards that we have and the flashback cards we have. Those kind of cards would be great for this because you can discard it and then you can bring it back for either its blitz ability or its flashback ability from the graveyard later when you need that card. And then again, you get to kill one of your opponent's permanents, which again, very powerful ability. And this, I feel like, will see Standard play over the next 2 years because it's a good card. Next, we have Tablet of Completion. For 2 mana, you get an artifact that you can tap it to put an oil counter on Tablet of Completion. You can tap it and add a colorless mana. Activate only if Tablet of Completion has 2 or more oil counters on it. So unless there's a way to double your oil counters, you're going to have to tap this twice. But you get to do it once when it comes into play. So say you play this on turn 2. By turn 4, then you've got that ability for it to be a mana rock for you. So I think that's a decent ability. And then for 1 mana, you can draw a card and activate only if Tablet of Completion has 5 or more oil counters on it. So to get to that ability, this has to probably go in a proliferate deck or a deck where you're using something like Furnace Skull Bomb to put additional counters on it to get it to the 5. But once you get to 5 counters, that 1 mana to draw a card is a very powerful ability. And then when you pair it with something like Teferi from the Innistrad set, Midnight Hunt, that's a really powerful ability because Teferi can untap it. So in theory, you get your 4 counters on it, or 5 counters on it, excuse me, and then you draw your card, Teferi untaps it, and gives you the ability to draw a 3rd card. So basically drawing potentially 3 cards every single turn, and that's a really, really powerful way to do things. So that's kind of where I see it. Now, outside of that, is it going to be Standard playable? I'm not sure. If you just have to tap it to get to the 5, it's not playable at all in Standard. But if you've got other ways to get oil counters on it to get it to that 5, then I think it really does have some playability in Standard because that low cost to draw a card of 1 is very, very good. And it doesn't require it being blue to do that, which I think makes it something that other colors will look at it and say, can we get there with this to make it happen? All right, and those are today's spoilers from Phyrexia, All Will Be One. I assume we're going to get some over the weekend, so we'll probably have another video out probably on Sunday to look at what we see over the weekend. Hope you've enjoyed this video and what we are seeing from Phyrexia, All Will Be One. Again, thanks to Caffeinated Gamers for sponsoring the video. Please remember to like and subscribe so you can get our content again. And I will see you over the weekend for another Phyrexia All Will Be One spoiler video.